Welcome to Relationship Mastery, a podcast for those who want to learn how to master the art of creating happy, healthy, and loving relationships. Please join me, Adey-Jones, and my co-host, Barry Selby, each Tuesday at 1 p.m. Pacific for a lively and informative conversation on everything to do with relationships. I'm very excited about today's topic because it follows on from what we were talking about last week when we were talking about those relationship patterns that we learn, or those generational patterns.
Indeed.
And sometimes it's really funny, and I know you can relate to this too, but we find these patterns within our relationships. We might be in a relationship and we end it, and we saw everything that was wrong in that relationship, and we're never going to do that again. And then we change partners, and then before we know it, it's like, oh my God, here I am again. I'm with the same person, and the same dynamics are showing up. And so, I think this is a great topic. So, why don't you go ahead and share some of your insights on that?
Sure. Yeah, it's like the do-si-do. It's like you change partners, but the same stuff shows up.
Hmm.
Let me share a couple of my own personal repeat cycles so I can just illustrate before I get into the explaining why and what we do with it. I have a couple of patterns that I'm very clear in my own life. I mentioned last week's episode, I think I mentioned about I was raised in a very nice family. I'm using the term loosely, but we were very basically repressed is the best word I would use. We weren't very emotionally expressive or loud or volume, and my parents never, as far as I remember, my parents never argued in front of the kids. So we had a very level quality, or I should say, low volume communication. We didn't raise our voices, so to speak, very much because that was frowned upon. So that became one of the disruptive influences in my dating life. In my early dating experiences in my teens and 20s, I would get together with somebody I was attracted to. We would have a nice time. Things would go great. But within a month, maybe 2 months at most, there'd be something going wrong, and she'd get upset, and she basically would raise her voice, or she would get upset with me, and I would shut down, and quit, and I'd leave. Now, the wiring I had didn't realize it afterwards is that I had a belief in my circuit, so to speak, that arguing and love didn't go together, because argument was upset, was whatever it was the opposite for me of what loving was. So I believed, without knowing any better, that any relationship that didn't have harmony all the time was not going to work because it wasn't loving. I missed out on all the good stuff like makeup, sex, and everything else. But the reality it was a programming that I carried on for quite a few years into my probably late 20s before I figured out what was going on. So fast forward now to something else, because this is actually what launched me into my own work. I had 3 relationships in a row, and I vividly remember each of those 3 relationships where I clearly saw, and I was much more aware of my own self at this point, the same thing happened in each one. However, it took the last one to be the most demonstratively described and explained to me what I was doing wrong.
I think you're being very polite again, but
Yes.
we'll get to that in a minute.
Well, to be honest, partly because I've done all the work, and so I don't feel so upset by it. But secondly,
Mhm.
it almost amuses me because looking back in hindsight, that breakup pushed me, moved me, inspired me, drove me into the work I've been doing for the last 15 years.
Yeah.
And so if I ever see her again, I'll be thanking her for her vitriol, because it was what gave me the seeds that launched my work into what I do, and the reason why I do the work I do. Because what
Mhm.
happened was those 3 relationships, and over the many years, including USM, I was really doing deep spiritual work and a lot of open-hearted work. And what was happening was I didn't realize I was becoming more heart-centered than anything else. So I wasn't being like driven by my cojones or my balls sort of thing. I was like, I was being nice all the time. So a lot of women I was going out with actually were leading the way, because I wasn't taking charge of myself. I wasn't leading. And the last relationship of those 3, she asked me out. She basically ran the relationship. And interestingly, when I look back at her, she wasn't my usual type. She had very short hair. She was fairly petite. Had a very boyish figure too. I mean, the signs were very clear.
Mhm.
However, I missed them totally. It's like missed totally over my head. But the thing was, at the end of that, she said to me what wasn't working was I didn't take charge and run the relationship like she wanted me to, even though she saw me initially in leadership roles out in the places where she saw me. So she thought that's the way I was in relationship. Not
Mhm.
the case. I was abdicating my role, and I'm clear about that. I know what I did, quote, wrong, but
Mhm.
it's because I didn't want to offend. And then, so this ties back into my family dynamic too. Like, you don't offend. So taking charge for me felt like I'd be, um, I won't say pushing the wrong word, but I would be sort of suppressing her freedom if I took charge, kind of thing. And it was totally made up stuff because it wasn't what I didn't ask her or anything like that. Anyway, so at the end of it, she said she wanted someone like her grandfather was. He was this cowboy back in the Midwest who took charge around the show. Actually, a very macho guy. And she showed me
Mhm.
pictures of black and white, grainy, actually probably sepia tone picture of her grandfather who had, like, what do you, film things, the chaps, the chaps and the boots and everything else. And I'm like, I'm never going to be that. Anyway, so the relationship ended dramatically at that point, but that's what really inspired the work I've been doing for the last, say, 15 years, 16 years. Interestingly enough, she was actually getting divorced at the time we went out, and her ex-husband and I have become good friends, and we were very similar, surprisingly enough, because that
Mm.
was her pattern.
Yes, exactly.
So,
You know,
sorry, you tell some of yours, then I'll explain what the mechanics of that are, so people
yeah.
understand what we're talking about here.
Yeah, no, actually, I was feeling, I was feeling compassion for some men that, there is this expectation of be a man, but at the same time, be a soft, sensitive, loving, nurturing, loving man. And sometimes I think but I think it can go the other way too. And this could be another show, but about the male female roles that we take on
Mhm.
and what's expected of us. And equally so, I think there's a lot expected of women now too. They're not just the homemakers and the nurturing and the loving and raising the children. They're
Right.
expected to work outside of the home as well and do everything within the home. So it goes both ways.
Mhm.
The expectations that we can have of our partners. So, when you were sharing that, I was thinking about my own, what was modeled for me. And we mentioned this last week, and I was saying that there's that um, arguing and fighting was very common in my house. So I was never afraid of that.
Right.
But I
So
also
different.
realized
That's so different from mine.
very different, yeah. But also that being raised by a single mother, never seeing her in relationship with a man. She had relationships, but they lived elsewhere. But
Yes.
I realized that I'm very comfortable taking the lead in a relationship because I've seen it. I've seen that was
Yeah.
what was modeled for me was this strong, independent woman who did it her way. And so it is fascinating. As much as I was attracted, just as I said, to these sort of narcissistic types that looked like they were powerful and confident and everything like that, I can't bear to be controlled. And they are very controlling types. So I was not the shrinking violet. I was not the I was constantly pushing back, constantly fighting for my independence. So it's so, as we said, it's so great when you see these patterns. But yeah, carry on with your story. I want to hear more about what happened.
But the thing is, I mean, and just to add to one piece what you said about that thing about how we are meant to be in relationship nowadays between men and women, I just had a video of one of my Facebook lives from 6 years ago pop up in my memories on Facebook. Where I talked about, how do we date after Me Too? Because the Me
Mhm.
Too conversation, which is not done yet, I hope, really was bringing to light where men have been mistreating women for many years. And so the next iteration, which we could do as another show probably, about how do we date in the modern time, so to speak, definitely
Mhm.
something to be discussed. So, okay, back to this episode.
Yes.
It's tempting to go all over the place, I know. For me, as I mentioned, these cyclic patterns, these repeat cycles of having several relationships in a row where the same thing happened, I didn't get a real clue the first time this happened when I was in my teens and 20s because I didn't have any awareness at that point. But certainly, the last batch that I had were very much informative to me, and I knew something had to be done, and I knew it was inside of me. The first thing I mentioned this more than once in our previous episodes about awareness being the first step is
Mhm.
when I was aware and going, hang on a second, I've been here before. Not only that, but it's a different person I'm with. So
Hmm.
therefore, the only thing that's common to all of those relationships is me. So,
Exactly.
so whatever is going on, I think I better look in the mirror first. And that was the thing that was a change because, like most people probably, when I was early on, I would just be blaming the other person. It's like, oh, it's not my problem, it's theirs. I'll just move on to somebody else. And unfortunately, many people do date and have relationships where if it doesn't work out, they don't look at it with any sense of um, forensic insight.
Hmm.
They just go, okay, done, next, sort of thing. And
Yeah.
so taking the time to actually, especially if you have had repeat patterns, or as Ron Hollick, one of the faculty at USM, says, like serial dating, whereas
Hmm.
maybe it'd be a different relationship, but the same pattern, the same experience. Even though the face changes and even though the personality changes, the same stuff shows up. So the key is to start looking inside, and it was a game changer for me. That last paradigm that I was in, where I was being the nice guy and letting the women run the show and not being in charge, is because my reference points inside were a duality or a dyad between being the nice guy or being the bad boy. That was the only reference I had of how to be a man in the relationship field. And my dad was kind of a blend of the two because he was a nice guy, but kind of very withheld because of being stoic, English, reserved, Jewish type man. Didn't know how to
Hmm.
express emotions, so he was very rigid, and I didn't want to do that. I was averse to that, so I became more emotional and more expressive, but didn't have the hardness or the strength of being the manly man type thing. And I didn't want to be that. I'd felt how constrictive that was, but also found how it didn't respect other people. It was so bullish in its way. It was arrogant almost. So I didn't want to
Hmm.
do that. And so
Yeah.
after that last breakup was when I was basically saying, God, give me a clue, give me a sign. Through some interactions and meeting somebody very new a few months after that, I found the work that I've been studying since that point, which is really the discovery of what it meant to be a masculine man in the world. Because there's no classes teaching that up to that point I'd been through. And I've been in the personal development field for many, many years. And we never touched on that part of the conversation about masculine and feminine polarity. I'm
Hmm.
now baffled with that. I've been studying with it, teaching with it, practicing it for years now. So I understand exactly what I did wrong back then. I should say what I did ineffectively back then because I didn't know better. If you know better, you do better, ideally. So
Yeah.
for me, discovering there was a third choice to be in the world, to be a masculine man, which is different from being macho or nice guy.
Hmm.
The transformation for me.
Yeah. No, that's great. And it is, it's, as you say, it's awareness. And I think I mentioned on the last show, so I don't want to totally repeat it, but after my last narcissistic relationship that was really wounding to me, um, by the time I had licked those wounds and felt ready to come out again and try again, it was the same type again, but I saw it so much quicker this time. And then so I ended that relationship. Then I got into another one very very quickly. I mean, I say relationship, dating.
Yeah,
So, but I saw immediately that pattern. It was like, oh my God, you're still attracted to the same type. Haven't you learned your lesson? So I took that time off. And as I mentioned before, that 18 months, whatever it was, and to do that work on myself, to really understand what was that conditional patterning that I was just acting out from. So yeah, we can change it. It's and so,
yes,
like we said last week, the change. I mean, the work doesn't even say the word work, but it's fun. It's fun to explore,
yeah,
our psyches. It's fun to find out, oh, that's what's running the show. I always say that, I before doing the work that I do, there was a 3-year-old running the show. There was a wounded little inner child that
yeah,
was going out on my dates. She was going for work,
absolutely.
interviews and things like that. And really, do you want this wounded child to be showing up in your relationships and in work and in life in general? And so the more that we do have an understanding of ourselves, we recognize the patterns. We recognize that it doesn't matter how many times we change our partner. It's going to be, different face, different body, but it's going to be the same person again and again and again
Yeah,
until you do, go on that exploration. And like I said, a fun exploration of really understanding ourselves.
it is a discovery process, definitely. And for me, I would actually agree with you. Definitely, the it's going to sound weird to say this, but the joy of the exploration and more importantly, the joy of the reunion. Because I would say the work that really transformed for me was to when I went back to have a conversation in quotes with my younger self, to actually
Mhm.
to have a conversation. Because just to be clear for anybody, for those listeners and viewers of our show, this programming we carry is something that we can change. First of all, it isn't hardwired, thank God, but
Mhm.
it's become habitual because we were raised that way, or because we've been defaulted to that behavior. So the key thing is, though, because again, as I said earlier, it's within us. We get to do the investigation. We get to do the reflection, looking in the mirror, so to speak, to see ourselves. As an adult, that's not where the issue lies or the challenge lies. It's actually way back then. I think I did mention last week about Bruce Lipton's work and about the unconscious.
Mhm.
Got this unconscious program running, so to speak, for want of a better word, that we can change the programming on. And the good news is that there is a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old in charge of that programming. So the good
Mhm.
news is that we have someone we can talk to. So for me, with the work I've done this work many times for myself and with clients, is to discover which part of ourselves, which younger aspect of us has been carrying that belief around like it's the law ever since that point.
Yeah.
So what we get to do then is to have a conversation and also a rearrangement of the agreement, so to speak, because ultimately any part of ourselves we talk to or have access to is never it never has that detriment as its focus. It always has its belief is that it's taking care of us on some level, some way, keeping us safe, making us okay, whatever that is. And so when we get to discuss where we are, so to speak, with it's like having like a conference with our younger self, but to actually discuss and figure out what the wiring is, we say, you know what, the motivation is real and agreed, but the practice of how it's being done could use some change from transformations. You don't make anything wrong. We
Mhm.
change if you change the wiring. The great thing is when we do realign that programming with our younger self, our adult self changes too.
Yeah.
So,
100%. And the other thing is, I think it's really important to, as you said, to to not berate ourselves or shame ourselves for an
right,
unconscious pattern that's been carried on through life. And it really is to love that wounded part of yourself, to care for that wounded part. You become the parent to that wounded part. You nurture, you take care of them. So there is no shaming or blaming. I mean, I say sort of in a joking way that the 3-year-old is running the show, but that inner relationship that you have with that aspect of yourself is so important, so that they get the attention they need, they get the love they need, they get to feel safe, and they don't sort of be acting out. And the other thing was, what I was going to say is, I know that there are certain things that habitual patterns that I did that served me as a child 100%. My fear of crowds. Well, there was a reason for that. There was a reason for that for many reasons. Of the community I lived in was not particularly kind to me or my family.
right.
So being wary of crowds served me well as a child, but it did not serve me well when I became an adult. And
Hmm.
it wasn't necessary anymore either. That as a young child, I was a little defenseless, but as an adult, I can cope with things. I don't take things personally anymore. If you are going to verbally attack me, I'll let it roll off me. It's you're just sharing more about yourself than me.
Right.
But that habit carried on for so much of my life, and I never questioned it. And the other one was, as I say, what my interpretation of my father not acknowledging me, I carried that through so many years of my life. I'm
Hmm.
not good enough. Otherwise, he would have loved me. And it was like one day I woke up and went, wait a minute, hang on a minute. How can a young child not be lovable? But it becomes so automatic, you don't even question it. And then
That's the key word, automatic. Yeah.
exactly automatic. And when you really question, like, is that true? Could that possibly be true, that I am unlovable because this man didn't acknowledge me? Of course it wasn't true. But I carried it for many years as it was a truth, that it
Yeah.
was that I had proof. I mean, that was my thing. But I have proof that it's true that I'm not good enough. And it's
Right.
and yes, when we can untangle from that, we can untangle from that conditioning and see the freedom that comes from that.
Absolutely. Because the
Yeah.
thing is, that piece though was really recognizing that it wasn't about you, it's about him,
Yeah,
about your father.
exactly.
And that's the thing. Are we're amazing creatures, young kids. When we're young, we take on things around us as being the law, the way things are. And when our parents tell us something, we tend to believe them because we think they know what they're doing.
Well,
And
let me add to that. What I say to that is not only do we think they know what they're doing, we need to believe that they know what they're doing
yeah,
because it's a very scary prospect for a young child to go, hang on a minute, the adults are a little crazy here. We would rather make ourselves crazy. We feel safer. And
true.
not only that, if our parents are right and we're wrong, we have a chance of changing the outcome because then we do that beginning of that self-improvement wagon starts at a very early age of they
True.
might be not taking classes or doing workshops or things like that but that belief of if I could just do better I would be more loved or I'd be more confident or whatever and it starts at that very very early age of blaming ourselves rather than seeing our parents doing the best they can, but not always adequately parenting us.
Yeah. And that's fundamental, and it's so true that that's one reason why I love doing work now as an adult, because when we go out to work with the younger self, we become the protector.
Yeah.
So it's not parents' job anymore, which is one of the biggest freedoms. But it is, in some ways, such a gift to be aware of these things because for many people, and I know I've talked to people recently about this, where they've got beliefs and rules in their life they run, which they don't have any idea why they're there.
Hmm.
That's the way things are. It's the law, It's as clear as to them as it is that gravity keeps us on the ground. It's like it's not
Hmm.
something mysterious. I should say it's not something that's like easily fixed or mysterious in that sense. Like they go, this is the way it is, like clear, black and white. And
Yeah.
so when we realize when we choose to when we work with somebody like us who has the skills to navigate to that place and realize that what we've chosen to believe is malleable and is not cast in stone,
Hmm.
we can actually change it to be more matching what we now know better because we're adults ourselves, and hopefully we have a better idea what life is about than when we did when we were kids. So we can then have a much more joyful, celebratory, successful, happy, fulfilling life going forward.
Yeah. And I like the word you used. You said choice, because it is a choice. It's not
Absolutely.
a truth. It's a choice as to how we perceive
Yeah.
events in our lives or patterns or anything. And when we see that right there is mastery, knowing that we have a choice, knowing that it's,
Absolutely.
like you said, not set in stone. So yeah, it's yeah, fascinating. I love having conversations with my inner child, and just but like that, she's the one that is fearful. You know, the adult part of me isn't fearful. You know, when I
Right.
really realize, who I am at my center and what the inherent resilience and innate well-being and all those fabulous things and wisdom that is guiding me every day, there is very little to fear. I mean, we're not sort of in
Right.
the room with a saber-toothed tiger, but that fearful thinking is coming from a habitual pattern of a very scared child.
Right. And the thing is that all that programming choices, default behaviors that the younger child had created were all intended to keep it safe.
Yeah, and
So
it
it's
and
still
it
adults. Yeah, and
yeah,
it worked.
yeah.
In its
Now it
yeah.
now it's getting in the way.
That yes. I was going to say. Well, let's say another way. Just because I want to clarify that one.
Yeah.
It's impeding our progress. I'll put it that
Yeah,
way.
exactly, exactly. It's just a tiny little obstacle, and so we can thank our egos or inner childs, however we want to define them, for trying to protect us and trying to warn us and like remember when remember when you did this and you fell flat in your face or whatever it is. But to know that we are all human and we're all wonderfully what's the word, fallible, and that we are going to make mistakes and it's okay and we don't need to be so protected and more open, whether it's to love or experiences or anything.
Absolutely. So that's a nice little thing there.
Nice little what, sorry?
little teaching we just given there.
Exactly. Yeah. So, yeah. So, how do you want to end on this note here for this show?
I would say simply this: that whatever you've been believing that's limiting you isn't required to continue. No, say another way. If you've been carrying beliefs that you feel like are limiting you, know that they can be changed. But you got to be willing to make the change yourself. And most of those beliefs you're carrying around have been built in to keep you, in quotes, safe, because when you were 4 or 5 years old, that's what worked. Now you're an
Mhm.
adult, you can choose to change that. So it's worth looking at that clearly and using your past relationships as reflections of where maybe you went off track. Because again, we tend to repeat the same patterns with different partners. So ideally, if you had a couple of relationships, you'll see, the common threads. Now I know
Mhm.
what to. So the
Yeah.
signs are there.
No, exactly. And I love what you're saying about I often, if I get one of those fearful thoughts or that, habitual thought moving through, like, whatever, you're not good enough or you're stupid or you're whatever. My thing is like, is that helpful? It's like, is that helpful? And,
Same.
it's just energy moving through you anyway. It doesn't mean anything. I used to take it that, every insecure thought I had was pointing a truth to me. It's just reminding you who you are. But it's not. It's just a habitual thought that's been around for so long. I often say they're like squatters. They've taken up space in your head. They've camped there so long you don't even know that they're actually, invading your space. They're not really meant, to live there. So
So
yeah,
awareness is the first step. Become aware, notice the squatters, and decide what you want to do with them.
yeah, exactly. Well, this is another lovely conversation, and have a wonderful week. And I look forward to seeing you next week.
More to come. See you then.
Okay, great. Thanks. Bye bye.
Bye. We trust you enjoyed this episode and invite you to share this with your friends and loved ones. In fact, please subscribe to our Relationship Mastery podcast. That way you'll get each new episode fresh and shiny as soon as it is released. We'd love to hear from you as well. So go ahead and enter your questions and comments at relationshipmastery.show. Take good care. We will connect with you in our next episode of Relationship Mastery.